as a Yu-Gi-Oh player, you are familiar with toxic cards.
Very much so.
Okay, this is why I brought to you some of the most toxic cards Hearthstone has ever seen throughout its history. Now, you told me that you stopped around the Witchwood, so I only brought...
That sounds about right.
Okay, so I only brought cards from the year after and onwards, so that you have never seen any of these cards before. As a little bit of a warning, the game has gone a lot faster.
Interesting.
And the reason why Demon Hunter was so good is A, they have a 1-cost hero power that does 1 damage. B, their whole identity is mana cheating and damage, which you could probably imagine compared to a lot of other classes is very good. But on top of that, they get some of the most annoying fucking cards in Hearthstone.
Okay. So it's like if Mage and Warlock had a child, it's Demon Hunter.
I would say Mage, Rogue, and Demon.
Rogue too.
Mage, Rogue, and Hunter all had like a child and they put together.
Okay, so to clarify, so Outcast is, so for instance, this first card you're showing me here, Glide, it says Outcast, your opponent does the same, the effect being shuffle your hand into your deck, draw 4 cards. So if I'm looking at my hand, if it's the most left or most right card when I play it, that triggers the Outcast ability, correct?
Yes.
Okay, I guess I need to ask another clarifying question. Shuffle your hand into your deck. What happens if you don't have a hand? Like if Glide is the only card in your hand, how does that work? Or do you have to shuffle a card back minimum?
You would just draw 4 cards.
You just draw 4. Yeah. Okay, because in Yu-Gi-Oh, you would have to have at least 1 card in your hand to even activate this card. So I think that's just like a key difference I had to ask for. So the first thing that's going through my mind is like what I said. If you don't have a hand, you just draw 4, which is like fine. I mean, what, like Sprint? I think Rogue has Sprint, but that costs like 7 to draw 4 cards or some shit. That's my point of reference for everyone wondering here. So like we're already starting off good. But then there's also the fact that you can like shuffle your opponent's stuff back too. So like I know a lot of like super higher level Hearthstone, at least from what I remember, you would have like each player just has like 8, 9, 10 cards in hand and you're kind of just like slowly picking apart like this huge war of attrition. But that was like old Hearthstone. It could have accelerated past the point where that's not even the case anymore. You have 8, 9, 10 cards in hand. And if you're firing this so that now you go from 10 cards down to 4, going like -6 is really bad. Like that's really, really, really bad. Especially if you've been, like discovering cards, if there's cards, I'm not sure if Hearthstone, there's cards that like you reveal are going to be in their hand, different things like that. But like if you know some of the cards or if you can read some of the cards might be in their hand that they're holding, that's pretty bad. And then best case scenario, right, is like you have like hardly any cards and your opponent has 10 and you play this and it's like, well, I guess we're both equal now. Like that sucks. There's a card in Yu-Gi-Oh actually called Morphing Jar. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it. It's kind of similar to this where it's both players discard their hand and draw 5 cards. So it's kind of similar to this. Okay. There's several other cards that do that similar effect where they shuffle it into the deck or destroy everything or discard the hand and they all draw 5. So that's what this is reminding me of. And in Yu-Gi-Oh, those cards are toxic as fuck. So based off of that, I'm going to say that this was toxic. Yes, I think it's good, and I think it was toxic.
So this is the very follow-up expansion when Demon Hunter came out. When Demon Hunter came out, it was disgusting. Literally... They had 3 cards nerfed in 24 hours. I've never heard 4 cards nerfed in 24 hours. I've never heard in any other card game that happen. Like that's how egregious the class was when it came out. So Skullman's Academy comes around, which is the very next expansion. You have to follow up that power level. Otherwise it's going to be like, I don't even know how any of these cards are going to get played. People are already mad at Demon Hunter. People quit the game because of Demon Hunter. And then they see this card, which is, like you imagine, you have a whole hand and then your opponent plays Glide against you and you're sitting there psychologically upset about what just happened. But the thing ends up being is that you're paying 4 mana to draw 4 cards, which is not great in Demon Hunter specifically.
Okay.
In other, like you're talking about Sprint, which you want to hear something absolutely crazy. It's 5 mana right now and the card is never played. Like,
my God. Well, that doesn't surprise me. Yeah.
It like that kind of gives you a little bit more of like how far Hearthstone has come. The psychological damage of Glide, if you did hit the Outcast, was much more impactful than just what the card actually did.
Prosecutor Maltranix, if I pronounce that correctly. Sure. Battlecry. Your opponent can only play their left and rightmost cards on their next turn. That is very funny considering Outcast is a mechanic. Okay. This is, oh my God, this is really bad. There was one like really old card in Hearthstone that people always used to play. Was it Lotheb? The thing that makes everything cost like 5 more or something? Yes. This sort of gives me Lotheb vibes, just in the sense that like, it's not making everything cost 5, but it's making it so that you're only going to be able to play like 1 to 2 cards at max on the next turn. And I remember like that card being very good. This card gets a lot worse the less cards the opponent has in their hand, because if they have 2 cards, they can still play both cards. It doesn't matter. If they have 3, they just have to play 1 to unlock their middle one. But if they have 10, right, now like all of a sudden they're basically just locked. And so this card scales with how many cards the opponent has in the hand, which I think is really disruptive. I mean, I think that's just like really annoying that you're just locked like that. I mean, just like straight up, like that sucks.
Would this card be played in Yu-Gi-Oh?
What? That's an interesting question. Let me think about this. What would this translate to in Yu-Gi-Oh? Let's say this is just a guy I can play. Oh, this is only for their next turn, though. This isn't permanent. It's just for 1 turn.
Yes.
Okay, that also changes things too. I thought it was like permanent.
If it was permanent, oh my God.
Yeah.
Please.
I think this would actually be, so the problem with Yu-Gi-Oh, right, is that you can't stop people from shuffling their hand. It's not a digital card game. So like, unless there was a rule in place to stop people from physically moving their cards around. In Master Duel, it would work, because like Master Duel, you have no control of where your cards go.
Yes.
So like that would be fine. But like in actual Yu-Gi-Oh, this mechanic just wouldn't work, which is why it's cool that Hearthstone can do it. Yeah, I'm gonna say this is pretty annoying. This is pretty good. Yeah.
Okay, so this card sucked.
Okay, well, never mind.
So you actually had like the really right idea there. Is the less amount of cards in your opponent's hand, the worse this card ends up being. It's also a 4-mana 2/6. So the tempo that you lose for playing a card like this, when most of the time it's not going to be that relevant. Obviously, contextually against some decks, you're going to absolutely roll them. But for the most part, like this is not going to do enough where no one ever played it.
All right, due process. Very funny play on words here. 4 cost. This is Druid?
This is Druid,
right?
Yeah. This is Druid.
Okay. For the rest of the game, players draw an extra card at the start of their turn. Players draw an extra card at the start of their turn. Okay, so that also counts your opponent. Ugh. So it's funny. There's actually a card in Yu-Gi-Oh! Now. It's called, I'm probably going to butcher the name. I think it's called Time Tearing Morganite. And this, for anyone who hasn't played modern Yu-Gi-Oh, this will give you context to how crazy this card is. So it's just a normal spell, and it says for the rest of the game, every draw phase, you draw 2 cards. Just you, not your opponent. You draw 2 cards. You can have 2 normal summons, and there's like some other third thing that gets doubled. I forget what it is. But basically, it's like one of the best control cards ever. But Yu-Gi-Oh's so fast that like only one deck plays it, and even that deck sucks. So if that card was printed like in old Yu-Gi-Oh, it would have been insane.
Yeah.
So this is giving me vibes of this, except this card seems way worse than that because it counts your opponent. Here's a question. Does this stack?
Yes.
So if you activate multiple, and I believe 2 copies per card. So if you activate multiple due process, or if there's some other way to duplicate it, like discover other copies of it, it could be like they're milling 3 or 4 or drawing 3 or 4 cards per turn. Okay.
Yes. Also,
so that matters too.
I'm going to show you this card as well for context.
Okay. Solar Eclipse. Cool art. The next spell you cast this turn casts twice. Okay. Well, there we go. Thank you. Another Druid card. So you're already slowly leading me down the path here. Now the question becomes, was like mill Druid a thing? I feel like if this was Yu-Gi-Oh, this card's awful. Yep. If this card's printed in Yu-Gi-Oh, this would see no play. Yeah, so I'm gonna say no. I'm gonna say like it's like maybe saw a little play, but not a ton.
Okay, now I'm gonna re-ask you this question. What if this card costs 2 mana?
Playing this on 2 is a lot different than playing it on 4, because burning 4 to play this feels really bad. Playing it on 2, because then you get to, yes, you're giving your opponent stuff, but then like you get to start like really getting into your cards on like 3 and 4. I think that makes this card way better if it costs 2. But I still don't know if it's like, I'm still gonna stick to my guns and say it's like it's more playable, but still not like insane.
Okay, so this card people hated, for the record. This card, I believe, was nerfed because of how awful the play pattern was of this. Because you could go Solar Eclipse into due process, so you're drawing 3 cards at the start of your turn, and then you do it again. Then you're drawing 5, and then you don't have the mana to play all these cards, right? Because like it's not like Yu-Gi-Oh where you just play your cards willy-nilly. Like you have to spend the mana for it. So you get to a point where it's like you're constantly watching your cards getting burned, and then Druid's obviously building their deck towards this win condition. So
of course
they have like armor gain, or they have ways to shuffle more cards in their deck, so they're not worried about getting it burned. And currently in Wild, this deck is like it's pretty good. Like you are willing to play Due Process Druid at 4 mana.
6 mana Ticketus. Very stupid name for a guy who looks very funny. Battlecry. Remove the top 5 cards from your opponent's deck and then corrupt your opponent's deck instead. Okay, so to get corrupt, like we just said, you have to play something bigger and then you just... okay, clarify. Remove the top 5 cards. Does that just send them to grave? Does that banish them? Where is remove?
Banish, basically. So Hearthstone, we don't actually like technically have a graveyard, right? It's more just like they'll have cards like if you could resurrect a minion that dies and then it'll like just pick one of them that dies, but you can't actually interact with it. If a card is like burned like from mill or it is removed from the game, like there are cards that just say remove this card from the game, don't actually kill it. It is just gone. Like it is banished.
I'm trying to think like worst case scenario here. So like worst case scenario is what? You would find some way to like duplicate this effect or like trigger the Battlecry multiple times while it's corrupted. Because I'm not sure like if it maintains corrupt in that sense.
It does, yeah, it does. So
it does?
The way you can think about it is like if a card is corrupted, it is a new version of that card. It will never regress back to its previous version.
Interesting. Yeah. Okay. So then it just becomes corrupted permanently. So yeah, so if there's some way to just like corrupt this and then continuously abuse it just to like banish your opponent's entire deck, that seems pretty fucking annoying. I mean, like, especially because you have what, 30 card decks in Hearthstone?
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
So 30 cards, banishing 5. You only have to do that a couple times to basically make it that your opponent doesn't have a deck. But I mean, this thing does cost 6, so you have to like get to that point.
I would ask you if you would play this in Yu-Gi-Oh, but I don't even know how to translate corrupt over to it. So
like, again, mill has never been, the only 2 times mill has been like actually relevant in Yu-Gi-Oh was when it was first released. Like when the game first came out, there was like a viable mill deck. And it's funny because Exodia was like one of the other decks, which is why mill was viable to stop Exodia. And then currently there's like a deck that can mill you, but it's just like a really strong control deck that has like mill as like as its like pseudo win condition. I feel like it's just so expensive though, but it's Warlock. You know what? Fuck it. I'm going to say that there's some dumbass combo that just makes it that you can just cycle this guy and just like banish your opponent's whole deck and they just lose and people hated it. So that's what I'm going to go with.
Okay. So this card was, I don't know if it was the most hated during its time, but it definitely was like top 3.
Okay, good.
It was
good.
so,
finally we got one.
It was so toxic to a lot of players that I had to ban. It's still banned in my chat, like the word Ticketus, because I didn't want to read it anymore.
Is it really?
It was, because the thing about Ticketus.
What's the combo?
Well, the combo is you corrupt it, then you play this card with it, which is, you can read that card real fast, and then I'll explain it.
Okay. You charge the Defiler. Add a copy of each corrupted card that you've played this game to your... I knew it! I knew there was some bullshit that makes it cost 0. I knew it!
So the reality is like, yeah, that combo looks really good. But for the grand scheme of the game, if you got to play Yashiraj into the second Ticketus, the game was probably already over. Like
interesting. So it was almost like a win more card.
It was almost a win more card in that sense, right? Because you're just playing a lot of stats. It's not like they really impact the board. Obviously, there are other corrupt cards I did not show you that might be really impactful here. But for the grand scheme of the Ticketus win condition, like the game was probably already over. Was this card good? That's the real question. A lot of people would tell you in high legend or just legend in general that this card wasn't great because Warlock would often just like die or you just lose the game regardless. And you could almost think of this as like removing the top 5 cards at the bottom of your deck is basically irrelevant because like you're never going to see those cards anyways majority of the time, so that it's not going to matter. Right. But obviously, psychologically, seeing your cards just pop off your deck is a much bigger deal because it's like, oh, I could have drew that card next turn, etc. Right? So like it does impact you a lot more. This card, I would say, as far as I remember, wasn't great, but it was playable.
All right, Convincing Infiltrator. 5 mana, taunt, death rattle, destroy a random enemy minion 2/6. It's a priest card too.
It's a priest card, yeah.
Priest card. Because this is priest, my mind immediately goes to the fact that you could just like have ways to constantly resurrect this, and that would be really fucking annoying. Even if it had like less health, that would just like still potentially be irritating. That's like the first thing that comes to mind.
I will give you the spoiler that there are cards that can resurrect this. So you already hit that mark. But also, this is a random enemy minion. Okay. So like if
people just hate random anything, like what's the guy, the flame juggler? Is that the guy that people hated? Because it's just randomly one ping something and can like lose the game immediately. Knife juggler. Thank you. Knife juggler.
That card for sure. That's a Thank God they don't do that design anymore, like, honestly. But convincing Infiltrator, there's this weird element of like, you could try to trade into it as well as you possibly can, giving like the cards you have and the minions on board. But sometimes it's just going to hit the minion you don't want to hit. And you're just going to be like, are you fucking serious?
See, but like, I feel like Hearthstone has so much of that you guys are already used to that at this point. So like, how much more tilted can you actually get? Like, so that's where I'm coming from. Like, we don't have that degree of randomness in our game, but like you guys are basically the RNG fest. So like, oh, what's just destroying another random enemy minion? That just seems like every other card you guys are playing. So like, okay,
I guess the philosophy would be, the fact that you're trying to trade as optimally as possible and you still get punished from it really adds a lot to it.
No, I can understand that. I just felt like this is the tipping point out of everything else when it comes. Like Yogg Saron wasn't the tipping point. Like,
people hated Yogg for sure, but I can't show you Yogg, right? Like Yogg is a completely different story.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair.
All right. So do you think this card's good?
Well, I mean, with how much you're like hyping it up, I'm inclined to say yes. I mean, like, is it a matter of if it's good or if it's just like the fact that it's 5? I mean, even at 5, though, if the game is slower, that still seems fine. I'm gonna go with no.
This card, it's really hard to justify how good this card really is. I think you're right. Like, it's hard to really give context to how good it is because against a very specific minion deck, like if they're going a lot of minions, this could just be winning you the game, like on the spot. Sure. You also have a card like this, which I'll let you read real fast, which is printed the exact same expansion.
Oh, summon 3 friendly minions that died this game. That sounds irritating.
So you could also play 2 convincing infiltrators, which is fun. You could also play 2 mass resurrections, which is fun. This deck was known as like Red's Priest or like Taunt Priest. So a bunch of taunts to stop your opponent from playing the game. Convincing Infiltrator was played for sure. I don't know if it was like a tier 1 deck, but it was definitely played. So I would consider it good and playable. But on top of that, I can't tell you, like, if you ask people right now, go to Reddit and like, what is the most hated Hearthstone card of all time? Like,
it's probably this.
It's going to be, this is going to be discussed for sure. Like, I don't know if it's this anymore. There are cards that I'm going to show you on this list that might surpass it like tenfold. But we'll get that in a second, okay?
Reno Lone Ranger. Well, I remember OG Reno.
You do, yeah.
So and I remember he was bonkers.
He's a very reoccurring character. Yeah.
Not surprising. If he's broken as he was before, is still TBD. Okay, 5 armor. So I'm guessing that just stacks on top of your health. Yeah. Battlecry. If your deck has no duplicate or started with no duplicates, excuse me, that actually matters quite a lot. Empty the enemy board and limit it to 1 space for a turn. So empty. What is empty the enemy board? That is a very specific language. That
let's say you had 4 convincing infiltrators on your side of the board. I slammed the Reno down. They are wiped from existence. Like they didn't die. They are gone. Their death rattles don't proc. Then what happens is your board only has 1 space. So Hearthstone has a maximum of 7. But now next turn, you only have 1 space, which means you can only play 1 minion for that turn. And if that minion summons something, you don't get the summon. You only get that minion.
Right. The opponent, and this is the opponent only gets the 1 space, not you.
Yes.
So you wipe their board. Yeah. And that's why I figured empty the board meant that you're not going to trigger death rattles or any of that stuff. That seems pretty crazy because you can still have your whole board and do this. Like, that's nuts. Yes. So then in the instance of the 4 infiltrators, you don't have any of your guys die. So that's cool. Limiting the board to 1 space for a turn is interesting. So for Yu-Gi-Oh context, there was actually a deck very recently called Kashtira. And Kashtira's gimmick, and this is something that Yu-Gi-Oh has tried to play around with before, but with Kashtira, they really made it truly, truly oppressive. Kashtira had a monster that every time, I forget the condition for it off the top of my head, but basically every time X happened, you could lock one of their zones, whether it's a monster zone or a spell and trap zone. Yu-Gi-Oh has 5 and 5. And while that monster stays on the field, those zones are permanently locked. And so this deck sort of like alternate win condition, I don't even know if this is the alternate win condition, but I wouldn't call it like the main win condition, is that during your turn, you do your whole first turn thing, you would typically be able to like disable several of your opponent's zones. And for the most part, that doesn't really matter. But for monster zones specifically, it matters because when you do combos, typically you need to have 3, 4 monsters on the field. So now all of a sudden, if you only have 2, now all of a sudden, like you might not actually be able to play your deck in any capacity. There's memes online of like Kashtira playing and like someone's whole board is like getting locked out by this card. It was very fucking annoying. People absolutely hated it, but it was permanent. As long as that thing stayed on the field, it stayed like that forever. Where the difference with Reno here is that Reno's only for the next turn. And in Hearthstone, a lot of the times, at least from what I remember. You can also get away with just playing like one card. Now, is that necessarily a good thing? No. I mean, you might still want to play like 3 or 4 cards. But I've seen several times where you just drop like a big guy. If you're playing an 8-cost guy, it doesn't matter if you need more spots because you might not have room to play another 2-cost minion. Similar to some of the other cards, just being able to prevent your opponent from playing stuff is pretty good. But I feel like a lot of the Hearthstone like oppressive effects only last for the turn. I mean, like a board wipe is good, especially if it basically nullifies any sort of like negative detriment. I think the biggest limiting factor here for why I don't think this is like insane immediately is the fact it costs 10. Because as you've been alluding to, Hearthstone is way faster now. So it's between, do the games end before like a card like this can get played? And like it actually make like a meaningful impact on the board. I feel like this would be very infuriating to play against though. So I'm going to say that this is toxic.
No, again, these are all toxic for sure. And
I mean, like very toxic.
Okay, fair enough. Okay. Do you think it's good?
Yeah, I think it's good.
Okay, so this is a fucking story. Like you went through a Yu-Gi-Oh story here. Listen to this shit.
All right.
When this card was released, it said if your deck has no duplicates, right? It didn't say if your deck started with no duplicates.
Okay, so it just has, okay, so it's like old Reno.
It was old Reno. And they, alongside this card, they printed a bunch of Highlander cards for specific classes that you could use with it, right? The thought process was you're going to play a Highlander deck and this is going to be like your big payoff because like I've been alluding to, like Hearthstone is a very powerful game and Reno is a very powerful effect. This card is very good. You know, if they didn't have the text, if your deck started with no duplicates, the biggest change from old Hearthstone to new Hearthstone is how fast you draw cards. So you could get to the point where your deck had no duplicates in it and it was active in a non-Highlander deck, which means there were so many decks that would play Reno because it used to cost 8 mana. And at 8 mana, that shit was insanely good.
If you showed me 8, 100% this card's just batshit crazy.
But hold on. We're not done yet. We go so Reno, obviously very, very good. Now, I can't say this enough. Even at 10 mana, I think right now this is the most hated card in the game. And it's because of how detrimental and how bad it feels when your entire board is removed and you only get that one space. You're talking about like, oh, maybe you have one big card, but like still like you're so behind in tempo. It's like if you don't have that big minion immediately, like what the fuck do you do? Like you just lose the game there. So it is a card that basically I'm going to say it stat checks you, but realistically like it ends the game or like you have lethal like the turn after it gets played. Now at 10 mana, this card is still good, but it's not nearly as it used to be. Obviously, it got nerfed by 2 mana and the effect was changed. Reno is like playable, but it's not good. They told me that they nerfed them because their new expansion's coming out and they don't want the entire metagame to revolve around this fucking card. Because like, there's no way. Like, I'm trying to give it like Yu-Gi-Oh terms. Like, imagine like you release a Yu-Gi-Oh expansion. I don't know what they call it. Maybe like a set, and then Maxi still playable. Like, who fucking plays that game? So it's the same. It's the same concept with the Reno.
Immolate, 4 cost, light every card in the opponent's hand on fire. Wish we could do that in Yu-Gi-Oh. In 3 turns, any still in the hand are destroyed. So it doesn't do anything aside from the fact that if they keep the cards in their hand, it just blows them up.
Yeah, so if they play the cards, the effect is like negligible for sure.
This is an interesting card because it's like it forces you to be more aggro if you can, but like obviously if you're playing stuff that's like higher cost, you're sort of limited. So then it forces you to like choose between like what to actually play. But this card could get mega toxic if you have stuff that's like too high costed. And like, I guess you get like mulligans in Hearthstone, but like you don't know if your opponent's going to have this. But like if you draw a hand and it's like all 7 drops plus, right? Then you're going to hate this because then this is just going to literally just pitch your whole hand. But with what you're saying about how much card draws in Hearthstone now, like I'm not sure like if that even matters. I think that the mind space I'm taking for this now is how annoying would this be if I was playing against this card? Yeah. So like turn 4, I get immolated. And with my limited knowledge of Hearthstone, what happens? So now I have to like suboptimally play a lot of the cards in my hand because I don't want to lose them. I have to like plan out the next few turns and think, okay, either I'm going to lose these cards or I have to dump them onto the field. Which then you could take advantage of because since you're playing Warlock has a lot of like destructive stuff or a lot of stuff that can like sort of capitalize on that chaos.
Weird card, right? It really is.
It's a very interesting card though. It's an interesting card. Like in a sick sort of way, I kind of like that dynamic, but I'm like after hundreds of games, would I be sick of this dynamic? And I think the answer to that is yes, because I'd be like, oh fuck, here we go again. I'm going to go with no. I feel like it's annoying, but I feel like I'm going to go with like that this card's like, it's like good just because it's like a gimmick, not because it's like a good card. And I'll happily be wrong.
No, that's actually the perfect answer to this. No, 100%.
Yes. Yes.
So when this card was revealed, I was like low key upset because I was like, why are they making this card? Like, what's the point of this card? Like it only makes one person's life miserable. And yeah, I get like in card games, the whole point is to have fun with the cards.
You are playing Hearthstone.
So. That's also fair. So like, but do they really need to double down that much on it? Like it's kind of, anyways, I was not worried for this card, but I was worried that like, in terms of like being a streamer, if I consistently saw this card, like it'd make making content like awful.
Right.
But yeah, you're right. Like it's 4 mana, do nothing. And if you're going against an aggro deck, like they're just gonna play the cards.
They don't
care. Like
great.
And then if you're going against a slower deck, like unless you hit like maybe one of their like primal win conditions, this often doesn't do like anything either. Like 4 mana, do nothing is not great for most of the time.
Okay. Objection, 3 mana. This is mage. Aren't all the mage secrets 3?
Yes.
Like, aren't they typically the same? Yeah. Because they want to keep you guessing on what it could be.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Secret. When your opponent plays a minion, counter it. So I'm assuming it's just like, let's take for instance, if this is a Battlecry or a Death Rattle minion, I'm assuming it just doesn't even get the abilities, correct?
Yeah, 100%. And
also, it never hits the board is the way I look at it.
Exactly. So yeah, just what you said. If I'm playing a Battlecry minion and I play it and you have ejection, I don't get the minion. The minion's not even on board. It's just completely gone.
I feel like objection is only as good as few cards the opponent has to play, and or depending on the deck that they're playing, you know the play pattern of that deck. So because your opponent can play anything, like we can just play, okay, if they play a secret, depending on the meta and whether their secrets exist, if this is in the game, for instance, if I think this is one of the possible cards, I can just run out, you know, my little Stone Tusk Boar or whatever. Not that I might be playing that, but you can just run out like a 1/1 to check for this. And then if it triggers it, cool. Now I get to play my best card and win the game. And then you just wasted 3 mana for basically no reason. But if you know that on turn X, they're going to play Y card, because that's like the typical play pattern of a deck, and that's like maybe their only play, then like a card like this could be insane. Or if they're just on low cards, right? If they're on like 1 or 2 cards and you play this, now all of a sudden, you're going to counter whatever they play because they're desperate and have to play into it because they don't have the ability to wait because maybe they're going to die the next turn or in 2 turns. And now you countered like their, I don't know, they're fucking 8/8 or something, or like they're 10/10 or like whatever big threat is in the game at any given time. So I think with that said, I think this card is, I want to say it's like minorly toxic, not like overly so. And then I think this card is like okay at best.
Okay, it's just that, see, it's really interesting to hear from a Yu-Gi-Oh perspective. Now, I don't know, it's just because of all the shit you got to deal with in your game, but
probably
a lot of people would consider this card fucking awful to play against.
Interesting.
And
okay,
the
enlighten me.
So you probably remember Counterspell in Hearthstone, which is very simple. 3 mana, secret. When your opponent plays a spell, counter it. That's all it does.
Right.
This one is a minion, and often the minion one is so much harder to deal with because you're putting good minions in your deck when you build it, right? Like you want to make sure that you're playing good stuff. So any minion that gets countered, as far as I'm concerned, is already like okay for objection. But there are going to be moments, like you said, where you're going to go with like turn 8, and you know on turn 8 they're going to play their minion, like their big minion.
Sure.
So then they have to go through the song and dance of like, okay, if it's objection, I play this. Do I lose? Okay, if I don't play a turn 8, I got to wait till turn 9. And
do I lose anyway?
Yeah, do I lose anyways? Do I play a minion now and just hope that it's not objection? Right? Like this one is so detrimental to so many different game plans. It's also so much harder to test for this. Counterspell, like Counterspell gets procced by the coin. So it's like, oh, it's not nearly as bad. And minions are often very impactful to you winning the game. Spells are just like, you know, kind of helping your deck up. Minions are often what your win condition is going to be. So if you hit a minion that is very vital to their gameplay, you just win the game on the spot, right? And because of how powerful the ceiling of this card can be, I should say how high the ceiling can be, you always have to play around this card when it's in standard. So it ended up being really fucking good. Like really good. And again, I would say that a lot of people would be like, I hate this card so much. Why did they print this? And it's actually really strange why they made this card, because it feels awful to play against, but it's not like it's broken.
The unfortunate part of this card is that I think it's just really annoying because a lot of it's really just dictated by like, if your opponent plays it, what's in your hand? And then it's like, it's almost like the Max C dilemma in a way where it's like, cool, if I played this guy to test around it and they don't have it, then I just wasted my turn. But then if I play my big guy and they do have it, then if I played the small guy and they do have it, well, I wasted my turn anyway and I can't play my big guy till next turn, so I'm going to lose anyway.
Yeah.
So it just...
That's just a really good comparison. Also, on top of that, I didn't even mention this, but Hearthstone has ways of getting random secrets. And that's way worse than like a real secret.
Horrible.
Yeah, because like you're calling like the meta game, right? Like if I know objections in the game, and I think it's a playable card. If a mage plays the secret, I'm gonna immediately go, okay, that's objection. I have to play around it. The second a random secret is generated and then they play it, you're like, oh fuck, like fuck, yeah. It's even worse because now you're like, did he really randomly generate that objection? Are you serious?
Okay. Thear the Mad Duke, 6/4/4, Battlecry, discover a card in each player's hand and swap them. I'm trying to think like, okay, you get a card from your opponent's hand, but they get one for, so you can give them the worst card of the 3 that gets discovered, and you get the best of the 3 that you discover from the opponent. So that's good in theory. It just depends on like the cards that they have and like what you're trying to do. You're also taking it. So if it's like a combo piece for maybe something, then like you can disrupt that. Or if it's like, I'm making this up, but say there's some big guy on turn 7 that's like notorious for decks to play. So you play Thear and like you take the 7 cost thing and now no longer they can do the thing. Or like the Reno card, right? Like let's say they have that Reno card in their hand. You get to take that Reno from them. Like that seems pretty crazy. That also seems really fucking annoying that if that ever happened to you, you're probably just like actually going to uninstall the game if that would happen to you.
Yes.
But again, like, so this is one of the things where like Hearthstone's so funny because this is all just like RNG. It's just all random. So it's like, if you get a good card out of their hand, you're just going to be pissed. But if they discover a bad card, here's a question. Does the opponent know what you get? Yeah.
They would see it from like their hand. Like they would see, are you talking about
so like if I have a Leroy and you're, because the card's gone. Yeah, there's no duplicate, right? You're taking the card. So you would know you just lost the Leroy. Okay.
Yeah, you would.
Fuck that. That's annoying. And you're just going to be ultra pissed because then you're just like, oh, I just lost the best card in my hand just due to like, especially if you have like 7, 8 cards in hand. You're like, this is bullshit. Yeah, so that's annoying. That's this card. Yeah. That sucks.
But was it good?
I think it's one of those situations where like, I think it's like fine. The stats aren't particularly good. You're really just playing this to like infuriate your opponent. But like, it's like what's the card we talked about before? Imilate. I feel like it's just one of those cards that like 1 in every 10 games, they're going to play this fucker. And then they're just going to take like your best card. And then you just lose the game because of it. And you're like, that's terrible. Is that like good enough to play in like every deck? Maybe.
I think you're pretty much hit the money. First of all, toxicity, like this is obviously what you said. It's a very like unfun effect to have in the game because you're what like I talk about this a lot with like early days of Hearthstone. There's the concept of like zero fun or net zero fun design where like one player just gets the best thing and one player gets the worst thing and then like it just equals out to 0. That's what this card basically is, which isn't great design, but the thing is Hearthstone lacks like hand traps, right? So if your opponent's playing like a combo deck, like how do you interact with them? Like how do you actually stop them from winning the game? Well, this is one card. 6 mana 4/4 though is pretty detrimental for tempo. So against specific decks, like this is unplayable, right? But that's not how this card was released at. Okay, this card when this came out during Castle Nathria, when we got like all the cards, I said this card released at a 4 mana cost. It was a 4 mana 4/4, the exact same design.
Holy
and I said, this is the best card of the set. Like I can't imagine a world where you're not playing this. Every single time you play this, a 4 mana 4/4 is already great. And like most of the time you're taking something really powerful and you're giving them something bad. How is that bad? This card got nerfed so fast to 5 mana. Like it was not as fast as 24 hours, but pretty quickly after, like we started to realize like, oh shit, like this is actually a really good effect. And then next expansion afterwards, it also got nerfed.
Oh my Yogg. That's a very funny name. Okay. So this is Paladin, right? 1 mana secret. When your opponent casts a spell, they instead cast a random one of the same. Great. I can really see how infuriating this would be for people. Like, oh yeah, I'm just gonna play my coin, and then oh my Yogg, it's whatever like the board wipe card is that like Warlock has. I forget what it's called. The like 8 cost thing.
Oh, Twisting
like
Nether.
Black Hole. Yeah, Twisting Nether. Thank you. Yeah. This. I could just see this card being in the highlight reels for Hearthstone like all the time.
Oh, I think it was
just
for
sure.
like, yeah, I think it was.
I could, that would not surprise me. I mean, Yogg was, but Yogg's obviously like more of a spectacle. You're only doing one. I mean, this is like just similar to, what's it called? This is similar to like Counterspell in a way.
Yeah.
Where it's like, you're still negating the card, but there's still something is happening. I could see it being like not like the most toxic card ever. I could see this being toxic in the sense that it's just like you just get really fed up with it. And I'm noticing the pattern here, okay, of all the cards that are toxic have a lot of RNG elements to them for the most part.
Yeah.
Just saying.
Fair. That's
just
fair.
saying. So I think this is like on like the moderate level of the toxicity, because it's like, I think there is like some skill in this in the fact that like, if you know your opponent's going to play X card on like turn whatever, you play this before, and then it's sort of like the objection argument again, except it's just for spells. In terms of if this card is good, I want to say like no, only because of the argument that I said that most of the time, even though you're countering something, they might just get some positive benefit anyway. And even if it's not something that automatically wins them the game, like situationally, it still will be like a detriment to you. Yeah, I'm gonna go with that.
Okay, so in terms of toxicity, I personally hate this card probably more than like almost every other card on this list so far. I think the only card I can understand that. I think the only card I hate more is maybe Objection. The reason this card was actually just good is because it's a 1-mana counter spell, like you said. Like it is
right.
Like the real win condition here is like you're playing like aggro paladin, you have a board, you play this for 1 mana, and then all of a sudden your opponent says, wait a minute, if I cast my AoE that's gonna win me the game, I no longer get an AoE. And even if the card is still good for the opponent, quite literally it's not gonna do the same thing as the card that you actually wanted to do. Like most of the effects are not going to be the exact same.
Okay. 2 mana Mind Render Illusia. 1/3 Battlecry. Swap hands and decks with your opponent until your next turn. What? I'm thinking like I wish this was in Yu-Gi-Oh, because I think this would be so fun. This honestly like is something I could see Yu-Gi-Oh doing aside from like the issue of like stealing your opponent's stuff. Right.
Yeah. Oh, like in real life. Yeah. Yeah.
But I feel like this could be like a Yu-Gi-Oh card for how ridiculous Yu-Gi-Oh has gotten.
Sure.
So this is fun. Everyone watching this is probably like, oh, no, it's not. There's some card in Magic that's like really notorious for something similar to this. From what I remember, the card basically lets you take your opponent's turn for them.
Oh, yeah.
Which is like insane. This card gets very oppressive if you have like this being the only card in your hand and your opponent has 10 cards in hand and you just steal their hand. That sounds fun. Yeah. That sounds really cool. The more I talk about this, the worse this card gets. Yeah.
I mean, toxicity levels, bro, off the charts. Honestly, off the charts. Like,
yeah, I'm just the more I'm thinking, it's like this card is really high up there. I feel like
it's for sure.
Yeah, I'm gonna say this is it's pretty toxic, and I think it's pretty good too.
All right, so pretty good's an understatement here. Let me
yeah,
really set the
I was gonna say
stage.
like. I don't know if it's like, I wouldn't say it's like the best card ever in my evaluation, but like this is a very playable card.
So to give you context here, I recently did a like top 100 card list in Standard of all time. Like I went through, like I figured out what cards were the most impactful where they were in the game. This card I think was number 8, number 7. I can't, it's somewhere on there.
Holy
so like if you take, and the reason why this card is so good is because you reminded me of this when we were doing your Yu-Gi-Oh video. You can almost think of this as, you play this at the end, you do your phase, you do your attacking phase, and then you play this at the end of your turn.
Right.
And if you're playing an aggro deck and your opponent is relying on their board clears, you play Lucia, all of a sudden they have no way to respond to your board. They have they can't do anything. They're absolutely fucked. And that's what this card would do. It's basically like 2 mana to lock your opponent out of the game. Like it was checkmate. And then in slower decks with like this card, if you don't have removal or you don't have a proactive play, you just play it, and now you get to see what your opponent has. You get to play your cards, and often priest cards are very situational, so you just don't play a bad card, whatever, right? That plays into your hand, and then you get your hand back afterwards. This card is so fucking strong. Like I can't put it in perspective how powerful a card like this was. They nerfed
there's like very few instances that it's bad the more you just talk about it.
Yeah, it's the list goes on and on. And I remember when people were seeing this card for the first time and like people were already theorizing like why did they make this? Like what is the point? And then like as soon as you saw the aggro interaction, dude, it was disgusting. Like you drop this on turn 4 and your opponent, it's like low-thebbing, but like you low-theb their whole life. Like it is so bad. So they nerfed it to 3 mana in the hope that would be enough. It didn't do shit. It was still insane. So they unironically had to change the effect of this card, and this is what it reads now.
Battlecry, replace your hand with a copy of your opponent's until the end. That's
infinitely
that's not
worse.
Even close to the same effect.
Infinitely
not
worse.
Close.
So this card, it went from like, I'm telling you, like probably top 10 card of all time to I want to say like bottom tier. Like it's fucking awful now. Like you never played this card.
Now this is awful.
Yeah.
Wheel of Death. All right. It's an 8 cost. It's a legendary, most importantly.
Yes.
Destroy your deck in 5 turns. Destroy the enemy hero. What the fuck is this? Okay, This is a very Warlock card. This is a very Warlock card.
I'm going to give you some context here, okay? Obviously, if you're going to destroy your deck, you need to have a really good win condition. And
of course.
This is a good win condition. I mean, let's fucking go, right?
Winning the game.
But I will say there are cards that interact if your deck is destroyed.
Sure. And that doesn't surprise me. Or like rather cards that get like interact, like if they're destroyed from the deck, they do something.
Well, it's more like if you're, I don't know, maybe I showed you a card already, but if a deck has no duplicates, maybe you can play Reno now, right? Or like,
exactly.
If your deck has 10 or less cards, maybe something else happens, right? So like this, they printed this card, and I'll tell you this after actually. Go through your
of course. I know you don't want to give away too much. You don't want to give away too much. So 30 health. So I'm thinking, you're playing this on turn 8, unless there's some way to cheat it, which there always is. So that might just be irrelevant. 5 turns. So if you're destroying your deck, you're going to take, that would be 15 fatigue. It's like you're at 15 health. Not that Warlock doesn't have ways to get health back. Not that there aren't heroes that give you like health or armor to like reset that. That's not really like an issue. There are cards like similar to this in the sense, not that it destroys your whole deck, but it's like there's an alternate win condition card that like over the course of 5 turns, you can win the game. It's very bad. It's very old. So it's something that doesn't see any play and never did see play just because it was so frail and just fell apart with everything. But this is like, once you activate it, like it's on. There's like really not ways to interact with this aside from getting what? Oh my yogged, I guess. Like if you're going to oh my yogg this, that'd be funny. I mean, Warlock is potentially capable of killing someone very quickly. There's like no doubt about that. I guess it's just like when you factor in everything, are there the necessary combo pieces, which if you're paying a bunch to draw with Warlock 2, you just have to like not die. So can you not die with Warlock quickly enough?
Yes, that's
for this to resolve.
Also, just so
that's the question. That's the question.
Just so you're aware, there are cards you could shuffle into your deck to stop this fatigue from happening too.
Sure. Yeah, I'm aware. If you have like a critical mass of combo pieces to make this work, sure. Do those exist? I'm going to go with no. So I'm going to say like, in terms of toxicity, this is really annoying because like if you lose to this, then you're just like sitting across the table like, well, shit, like I'm playing this like dumbass control deck that can't win the game in 5 turns, so I'm just going to auto lose. But then it's like funny because if they play this and you can win the game, it sort of creates this like race dynamic where it's like I'm trying to win and you're trying to like just drop a bunch of stuff, but that could play into like board wipes and stuff. Yep. So that could be like annoying to play against because like you're racing the clock at that point. So like toxicity level, like I want to say it's like medium-ish. I don't think it's like the most toxic thing ever. So yeah, I'm going to say like the card's like okay in certain decks, but I don't think it's like particularly good and like medium level toxicity.
Okay, so in terms of toxicity, I don't know. Like it's weird because this is such a weird effect that I can't imagine a lot of people being that upset about it when this card
that's
is played.
how I feel.
Like it's such a like you're like, oh shit, like okay, like 5 turns, like how do I win this game? Now, depending on what deck you're playing, like you said, like a very slow control deck will probably just lose, which is unfortunate. But the way you look at it is like you just treat this as a combo deck and like they just comboed you and you died, right? This card actually managed to be tier 1.
Really? Interesting.
Okay. So the reason because of this, and this is actually a ginormous thing, when you read this effect, when did you think the countdown actually started? At the start of your turn, I'm assuming, right? It would be at the end of your turn. So this says 5, but actually it's 4 because you took a turn to play this. So then it's 4 turns. which means your opponent actually has less time to kill you because at the end of your 5th turn, when you hit end turn, the game is over. They don't have a follow up on that turn, right? Which is actually really big because you play Wheel of Death, your opponent gets their turn, you Reno them, and then it's like, okay, that's their whole turn gone. Then the following turn, they only have 1 spot. So then they can't really push any damage to you. And then next thing you know, they only have 1 more turn after that. And then if they can't win, they lose the game on the spot. Okay, I have 1 more card to show you. Now, I have left this card at the end because I think it is the least interesting card, but also one of the most toxic ones Hearthstone has ever seen. So in this case, Flinger, it says 1 mana, 1/1 Battlecry, deal 1 damage. So you do 1 damage, it's on the board. When you play a spell, it would go back to your hand, but then you'd spend the mana again to play the Flinger. So theoretically, you could only do this as much as mana you have to spend on spells and the Flinger itself.
Okay. I mean, I could already see like why this would be really annoying for Hearthstone. I mean, just on the surface, there's plenty of ways to like reduce the cost of stuff, to play like 0 cost stuff, like whatever. And then you just keep bringing this guy out and you just keep pinging stuff. So like that could just be like incredibly irritating. Man, what is it with your game and like the 1 mana 1/1s just like
the 1 mana cards are nuts. They're actually the best cards in this game. It's crazy.
I mean, when you're playing with a game with resources, I guess that's the case.
Yeah, it's fair. That is fair.
Yeah, I feel like this card would be really irritating in the hands of the right decks.
Yeah, so honestly, like there's not much to evaluate on this card, right?
It's pretty simple.
In general, very easy to understand why it would be good. It's an infinite ping that can go face, which is the biggest thing. So there was legitimately a deck that you would reduce spells to 0. You'd play this, play the spell, back to your hand, do this, do that over and over again. But
just keep going.
And you can see why they would be annoying. They eventually nerfed this card to say deal 1 damage to a minion, so you couldn't just only go face, which was a really big deal. But the reason why this card is so toxic is because of the play sound that it has when you play it. I don't remember in Yu-Gi-Oh! If there are play sounds when you play cards. It might be like a pretty good animation or something. But I want you to listen to that.
Okay, let me hear this.
Hey, loser!
Oh, that would be so irritating.
Every time this card
is played.
Every time this card is played, you just hear "Hey, loser" over and over and over again. And
surely they did that intentionally. Surely they did that intentionally.
It was honestly, in terms of flavor, fucking amazing. Like it is perfect. But if you had infinite spells and theoretically not infinite mana, but at least 10 mana to play this every single turn, it is so obnoxious. And the fact is like the play pattern's not even that interesting. Like you're just pinging their face over and over again. And this was played in multiple different classes. When they nerfed it, the card basically fell out of the game because dealing 1 damage to the face mattered so much. It's a win condition on its own. But yeah, I have to show you that effect just for the voice line.
That's a good one to end on. That's a good one to end on.
It's cards.
This is interesting. This is cool.
Yeah. So that's like I didn't show you a lot of the other toxic cards. There's a lot of cards I didn't really mention, but I think for the grand scheme of it, this is like probably the highlights. There's a couple of them that I probably could show you another time, but yeah, this is what Hearthstone is now.
You always ask me how I play Yu-Gi-Oh! I don't know how you play this, man. This.
I think card games just hate themselves.
I think we're sick in the head that we subject ourselves to this on a daily basis.
Yeah, I got you.